I'm Nivien Saleh, and today we're going to look at the Mujahideen of Iran, or as it's abbreviated, the MEK. And this is the second part of a two-part podcast about the organization. Today the question will be, is the MEK a cult? So with me here is Mr. Amir Emadi, who is a Thunderbird student, very eloquent, and he is an advocate of the MEK. So why don't you just say a few words about yourself?
Sure. Well, I am a Thunderbird student, graduating soon in less than a month, and I am a supporter of the Mujahideen of the MEK. I actually have relatives who live in Camp Liberty, who are members of the MEK, and I have relatives in Iran who are members and supporters of the MEK. So I have a very personal twist to many of the questions that I'll be answering today.
How did you come from Iran to the United States? Because my understanding is that actually both your parents are members of the MEK, and they are not in the United States, and yet you are, and you might actually be a U.S. citizen?
Yes, yes.
So why don't you tell us more about
Sure.
that?
I was actually adopted in the United States during the time that the MEK went into Iraq. It was still a war zone, war-torn area, and it was not safe for many of the children that the families took over to Iraq. And obviously the families took their children with them because they were escaping persecution and suppression in Iran. They were targeted by the regime because of their political views, their religious views, and their, the ethnic minorities. So when families went to Iraq, one of them being mine, they saw that it was not safe for children to be there. They sought the network, the MEK network, for help. Many of the families, including my parents, selflessly gave up their children to other families around the world who adopted these children, one of them being me, and gave them opportunities that they otherwise wouldn't have had.
So your parents, if I understand you correctly, they came in the 1980s to Iraq, and that means that before that they were in France, correct?
No, my parents were in Iran before that. Not all of the MEK were in France. I know some of the leadership went to France because politically it was the only place that they could go to at that particular time. But their intention was to have a geopolitical strength and to go into, well, they obviously wanted to be in Iran to bring about democratic change, but the closest that they can get to Iran was Iraq. The MEK established in Iraq in 1986. I was born in Iran, and I was born in 1987. My mother had me when she was 19.
Do you speak often to your parents? Are you close to them?
Interestingly, 2 weeks ago my father called me from Camp Liberty, and a week before that my mother called me from Camp Liberty. I don't speak to them often. It's maybe once every few months, but it was the Persian New Year, the Iranian New Year, so they called me, and it's the only form of communication that I have with them. I can't communicate via email, I can't call them, so they can only call me. And it's been one every few months that I would speak with my mother, and it's honestly, it's a very amazing feeling whenever she calls me. Sometimes it's 5 in the morning, 4 in the morning, but I get up and I ready myself, and she always, ever since I was little, I either sang for her or I drew pictures for her, and she always asks me for that.
Now let me ask you a little bit of a somewhat tougher question.
Okay.
Your parents joined the MEK, and in order to be members of the MEK, they gave you up to a family in the United States, another Iranian family that had close ties to the MEK. Most people would call that perhaps fanatic, but I understand that you actually admire your parents. So can you explain your feeling about being given up as a child?
Sure. I remember when I was a child, it wasn't easy. It's very difficult for a child to be separate from his parents. But as I grew older and I continued to communicate with them, it wasn't unlike any other communication between mother and child. There was very loving, very compassionate communication between the two of us, and even between my father and I. as I continue to grow and become more educated, and that's Western education and schools here, and as I continue to make my own decisions and walk on my own feet and become independent, I started to see things in different perspectives, and I tried to look at things as objectively as possible, and that's what they teach you in academics, is to think objectively, look at the facts. But considering that, and considering the relationship that I had with my parents, I admire what they did. They weren't giving me up forever, that they will continue to be in contact with me, and they will continue to strive to bring democratic change, not just for me, because this is bigger than me. I mean, I'm just one human being, but there's 70 million Iranians that, you know, that supposed to live in a country where they have rights, where they can be human beings and not be persecuted for it. And my parents believed in that, believed in changing suppression and torture and execution and public execution without juries to something where people can prosper, where they can be educated and grow and grow economically. And that is when I started to realize what they're doing is very selfless. You know, sometimes I fear that the activities that I engage in, or the speeches that I give, or the podcasts that I do, you know, the interviews, sometimes I fear this is going to be detrimental to my family in Iran as well. You know, I have 17 relatives in Iran who are in prison because of their political views.
Now, let me refer you to a documentary. I believe it was made in 2007, and the title is Cult of the Chameleon. It states that in 1981, Massoud Rajavi arrived in France, and his first wife had passed away, and in 1985, he married his second wife, Mariam, who ended up playing a very important role in the organization. And the documentary calls the organization a cult. A cult is an organization that takes away the individuality of the members and tries to turn them into some sort of mass without their own free will. So in other words, you could say it violates the human rights or the rights of human beings to their own individual expression. Would you say that the MEK is a cult?
No. In my opinion, the MEK is not a cult. To the documentary that you reference, I believe that 90% of the information on there, at least the statements that they make, are wrong. To your definition of the cult, I believe that taking individual rights away from people is a characteristic of a cult. More of the definition, and I had to look this up to be specific about it, to be accurate, more of the definition is having excessive admiration and even religious sense of admiration towards a group or an organization. Now there's different definitions. It can be, it's fluid. But I believe that a characteristic is, you're right, that it takes away individual rights away from people. The documentary that you mentioned, The Cult of the Chameleon, by Al Jazeera, yes. To mention again, 90% of the information on there I don't agree with, I don't believe in. And it is based off of, the primary source is Anne Singleton, who is a UK resident, a UK citizen, and her husband, Khoda Bande, who was an Iranian. Anne Singleton was a UK student at the time of the revolution. During that time, she felt, I guess compelled by this cause to bring about change to the Iranian government, this being the Shah's era as well. She chose to go and be a part of the MEK, and I believe that the MEK accepted her. This is my personal belief, because they appreciated her passion towards bringing about good change, positive change. Now, to the extent, and she claims this in the video, to the extent that she gave up a lot of her individual rights, were not things that the MEK had asked her to do, were things that she willingly gave up on her own. The MEK being an organization that does not deprive individual rights. It is not going to deny you your own rights to the decision making.
Now let
Yes.
me go on to another organization, and I think, generally speaking, it has credibility, and that is Human Rights Watch. In 2005, Human Rights Watch created a report which states the MEK leadership consists of the husband and wife team of Masood and Mariam Rajavi. Their marriage in 1985 was hailed by the organization as the beginning of a permanent ideological revolution. Various phases of this quote-unquote revolution include divorce by decree of married couples, regular writings of self-criticism reports, renunciation of sexuality, and absolute mental and physical dedication to the leadership. So Human Rights Watch says cult. I mean, the words that it uses all
Sure.
add up to cult. What do you
Sure.
say? Would you say that Human Rights Watch got it wrong?
I would say it's exaggerated. You know, Human Rights Watch is a very credible organization, and I'm not here to badmouth it in any way. I do use it as a source in some cases. But in this particular case, there are several things. To the things that you listed, that Human Rights Watch listed, as activities that the MEK engaged in that make Human Rights Watch consider it a cult. For instance, the self-criticism aspect of it. I've heard about this in the MEK, and it's not a self-criticism per se to the point where, you know, you're bringing down your self-efficacy and you're bringing down your optimism and your hope. What it is a feedback mechanism, and businesses use it all. It's like a 360 feedback, essentially. And I know that there's journal taking, which, from at least what we're learning at the MBA school and some of the books that I read, are habits of successful people. To take journals of what you do on a daily basis, how you feel and how you would have reacted, how you should react, and improve upon that on the next day. And the 360 feedback, to get feedback from other people to see how you are being perceived by other people. Now, with the other items that you listed, now I know I'm getting into specifics, but this actually relates to me personally. Divorce, forced divorce, or sexual deprivation and stuff like that. I've actually asked my mother about this, and this was a choice of hers. If you don't want to do it, you can leave. It's as easy as that. You know, there's nobody at the in the organization, nobody at the MEK forces you to stay celibate for the rest of your life. And that kind of leads on to, you know, my relationship with my parents. You know, I admire the fact that they can do that. I live in the Western world. It becomes difficult for kids around my age to do something like that. So.
Okay, let's be a little more specific.
Sure.
So when you say that they do that, did they actually get a divorce?
I believe so. I don't know if it's by paper, but I know that if you think of, well, when they went into Iraq, this goes back to my history personally. When my parents went into Iraq, this was a time where it was already a military force, where the MEK was a military force. And I don't know any military that they don't have rooms on the side for you to go off with your husband or your wife. And in fact, other militaries even in the United States have controversial issues as well. So getting into that is very controversial, and it could take another vodcast on its own. But I know that it's much easier for you to focus on one particular cause when you don't have to focus on a family, on a relationship, and essentially that is the decision that they made, and I'm happy with that decision. I'm happy that they opted to do that. There were a few things that you mentioned. The human rights. Okay, it was actually the era of when this Human Rights Watch came out. Human Rights Watch put out this report in 2005.
Yes.
In 2004, the U.S. military and the multinational forces provided what was called, under international and humanitarian law, protected person status to each individual member of the MEK in Camp Ashraf.
Yeah, and let's just, for context, state that the U.S. invasion of Iraq happened in 2003. So 2004 was when the United States governed Iraq for
a number of years, yes.
Yeah.
And in this time period, the members of the MEK were not just protected by the United States military and the multinational forces. They were granted protected person status under the Fourth Geneva Convention. They had ID cards. The military forces had the entire camp enclosed as far as barriers and support goes, and they did regular investigations in the camp, especially when this Human Rights Watch came out. They did unannounced investigations, regular investigations, and I believe there were over a dozen international security intelligence agencies that did investigations inside Camp Ashraf on the MEK, interviewing each individual member. Each individual
how
members.
many? There were like
there were
2,000?
There were 3,500 at the time.
3,500.
Yes, yes.
So they interviewed every single member?
Every single one of them. And after the interview, they gave them an ID card saying that you're protected persons. And they interviewed them on the intelligence side when they were doing their security checks and to get intelligence on the MEK. So organizations like the CIA, for instance, the military, the multinational forces, they were there. They were present the entire time that Human Rights Watch was drafting this report to present it. So how, when there's multinational forces, when there's the US military, when CIA and other intelligence agencies are conducting interviews and investigations in this area, how can they not see that there was human rights violations or torture chambers or whatever that may be that the Human Rights Watch?
Well, actually in Iraq there was quite a bit of human rights violation. Not inside the MEK, but there have been various documentaries about human rights violations in even in Baghdad.
Yes.
And so
but these
that would answer your question.
Well, yes, but not. But this is strictly pertaining to the MEK. In Baghdad, the MEK were not in Baghdad. The MEK have always been 50 miles northeast.
No, the MEK had nothing to do with any human rights violation in Baghdad, but the human rights violations that happened there happened under the eyes, you could say, of the United States military. So if that can happen in Baghdad, it can possibly happen in Camp Ashraf as well, even though the United States is there.
Right. Well, not just the fact that the United States is present there, but you have international security and intelligence agencies that conduct interviews or conduct their investigations in the camp, and you had the multinational forces, which included the UK, the European Union. Not the entire European Union. There's UK and there was some other countries. So it's not just the United States.
Yeah.
And again, this is getting into controversial issues about our own military and all that stuff. But how can Human Rights Watch even get a person in there to investigate anything if it's not on the list of one of the organizations that had gone in?
Well, let me give you a cue to that, and I will quote a few more sentences. Sure. It says here, the former MEK members reported abuses ranging from detention and persecution of ordinary members wishing to leave the organization, to lengthy solitary confinement, severe beatings, and torture of dissident members. So in answer to your question, I understand that Human Rights Watch talked to former members of the MEK that had left the organization and then somehow got in touch with Human Rights Watch.
The credibility of that, I don't know. I don't know the credibility of the individuals who were interviewed. Were they MEK members or were they not MEK members and they just claimed to be?
Yeah.
If they were MEK members, are they now not MEK members because of certain reasons? I know that, and this is getting into very political and conspiracy type things. Many people...
We like conspiracy.
The Iranian regime has paid off many people, has spent millions of dollars on propaganda against the MEK because the MEK poses the greatest threat against the Iranian regime.
You say democracy, so the MEK wants democracy.
Right.
And I understand that too from the public pronouncements of the MEK that it wants a secular democracy. My question is, how democratic is the MEK internally? And if it is not democratic internally, how can it really be a force towards democracy? So let's move to the first point first. Is the MEK democratic internally? Is its government, its governing structures democratic?
I believe so. I believe so because there's a voting system in there. In fact, they have a voting system where every 2 years they vote in a new leader. The current leader is Zohre Akhiani, and she was elected, I believe, last year. And she was up against 11 other candidates, and she won 67% of the votes. And she ended up becoming the leader of the MEK in Camp Ashraf. Now, what's interesting is anyone can have the answers to the questions that you posed if they watch Iran NTV or Simaya Azadi, which is essentially a global satellite TV channel that even broadcasts inside Iran. It has a pretty wide audience in Iran. But it broadcasts the activities inside of Camp Ashraf. So it's very transparent.
Is it a television channel owned and run by the MEK?
No, it's in France. I believe it has ties to it, obviously, but I wouldn't be able to answer that accurately. But it's not owned by the MEK, and I don't believe it's owned by the NCRI, which is the umbrella organization that the MEK sits inside of,
which is the National Council of
Resistance for Iran.
I saw some pictures on the internet of members of the organization. I can tell how old they were, but they all wore some sort of uniform. They all wore the same clothes. Do they currently all wear the same clothes or uniforms?
From the recent pictures that I have, I see different clothing. I don't see all the same uniform. I believe you can wear whatever you like, but when you're trapped in a small area now, Camp Liberty, without resources, you really don't have a choice what you wear. You have a minimum amount of belongings with you.
So in Camp Ashraf, which is where the members of the MEK had more space, they did not wear uniforms?
Well, they did wear, but I don't think they wore, it was a mandatory thing to wear. I know that they wore uniforms because I have pictures of them wearing uniforms, but I know they also wore sports uniforms when they played soccer or swimming uniforms when they swam.
Well, there may be different uniforms for different occasions, but the reason why this is important is earlier you said that the MEK was a military organization.
Yes.
And you referred to the 1980s. I don't know to what extent this is true today. But if you have lots of people that wear the same uniform, this kind of leads to the conclusion that this is a sort of military organization with a pretty strong hierarchy where the uniform actually serves to make everybody else equal and to some degree suppress the individuality. So if you're a member of any armed force, you're not supposed to march out of line. You're supposed to walk in line. You're supposed to look like everybody else. And military is not democratic internally. So is the MEK military or is it a democracy?
No, it's not military. It's definitely not military anymore. It has no military means, and it gave up arms, and it denounced violence, not renounced, denounced violence, and it gave up its weapons.
In what year again?
This was in 2004 when they got the protected service, protected person status.
So 2004, no longer military.
Yes, exactly. Since then, and that's 9 years.
And I would like to thank our guest here very much. He's been very eloquent, and you've just given pretty good answers to a number of tough questions, so I hope I haven't been too easy on you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the opportunity.
And thank you all for watching, and
thank you.
For additional video, check out www.niviensaleh.info, and to learn more about Thunderbird, check out www.thunderbird.edu.